Okay, good evening, Democrats. Yeah. The hardy Democrats. And I'm taking my mask off just to do this, and I'll put it back on because, as you know, there are viruses all over. So it's up to you to do what you want. There are masks. If you want one, we have a box of them out in the lobby. So I'm Vicki Shea. I'm the chair of the Farrington Democratic Club, and we're welcoming you, Hardy Bunch, to the gathering place and also to the people who are watching this on Zoom. Just a few quick reminders. Please turn your cell phones off, because as you know, they go off at the most inconvenient times. After our speaker, if you want to ask a question and you're here in the room with us, please wait for the microphone to be brought to you. We have someone who's going to bring it to you and is looking for raised hands. So that way everybody is going to be able to hear both the question and then the answer. And if you're on Zoom, please type your questions in the chat box and we'll read them out. Okay. So this meeting is taking place in the winter holiday calm after the 2022 election storm. In case you haven't heard, Chatham County had the highest turnout in the state for registered voters. And West Williams and East Williams, West Williams being us, were tied for the highest overall turnout in Chatham at 75%. Yes, we beat Man's Chapel. Right. So part of what we're doing this evening is celebrating all of our voters and all of the Democratic volunteers who made that happen. I know a lot of you participated. The other part of what's adding to the calm tonight is that our speaker is one of us. He's a Farrington resident and a Democratic Club board member who also happens to be an experienced teacher, journalist, and writer on a wide range of topics. He is going to share his ideas about his home state of North Carolina and the rapid changes and identity crisis we're experiencing. So please welcome Jim Buie.
Thank you. First thing I wanted to do is ask how many North Carolina natives, born and bred, do we have in here? Well, that's pretty good. That's more than I thought. For those of us, I mean, I was born and bred here, but I lived in Washington for like 2 decades and then went overseas for about 10 years. So when I came back, people would say to me, "You're not from around here, are you?" And I remember going to I was here in Farrington before we went over to the Middle East. I remember going in to the courthouse to let them know change of address, and this lady asked me, says, "You're going over there?" Well, I wouldn't go over there if they paid me $1 million. And so, you know, but we are experiencing a lot of change, and it's kind of scary in a lot of ways. So I don't know if I'm still a native, but I'm trying to look at North Carolina with fresh eyes, and America with fresh eyes. After being overseas, it's a little easier to do that, I think. You know, we used to call Cary the containment area for relocated Yankees, but that's clearly not true. The Yankees have not been contained, and Chatham County appears to be the new Cary. North Carolina seems to be a very different place than it was. I grew up in Scotland County near Laurinburg on the South Carolina border, about an hour and a half from here. It's a place with a lot of charm because it hasn't changed all that much in contrast to nearly everything else around here. My sister and her husband still live in the house that we grew up in. Scotland County used to be, when I was growing up, far more vibrant than it is today. I could measure the county's economic health by how many storefronts in my hometown of Wagram, population 500 when I was growing up there, were occupied. Nearly all were. We had a drugstore, a barber shop, an antique shop, a real estate office, a hardware store, 2 general stores, and 4 filling stations. My aunt was the postmistress. Since we had the same last name, she often read my mail before I received it. Opened by mistake would often appear on my mail, scrawled on my mail, but she happened to know everything that was going on with me and everybody else in town. She and my cousin who lived across the street knew everything about everybody. It was much faster than the internet. There wasn't any sense of privacy. You knew everything about everybody, and I'm talking everything. But it was a caring community in a lot of ways. My sister, the school that we went to was grades 1 through 12. We didn't have a kindergarten until 1968, and they still have yearly reunions. My sister calls it a cult because everybody wants to know everything about you. How you been doing? So in that sense, it's even 60 years later, everybody, the ones that are still left, are they care about each other. This past Tuesday, I went to last Tuesday, as it was. I went to the funeral of my 3rd double cousin, once removed. My family had been in that area since like the 1700s, and but my sister is the only one left, really, of all the descendants. So growing up in the 1960s, the Civil War didn't really seem very far away. We lived about a mile from the Lumber River, and there was a cabin on the river where a woman named Liza, who was born into slavery, lived. And she told me she was born in 1860 and could remember Abraham Lincoln. She walked a mile into town every day with a knapsack, even as her back was bent. My 5th grade teacher taught the Civil War from the South point of view. And I was in 5th grade the year after the Supreme Court decision banning prayer in schools, but she wasn't going to have anything to do with that. She was going to teach the 5th grade just like she had all of her career. And so everybody had to learn a Bible verse, and you got the gold stars. You did, and if you were a little late, which I think I was one of the last units to memorize the Bible verse, then everybody look at you, well, are you a good person or not? This. So, and it was a very conformist in that. She also, I had some cousins come down from up north. They were advocates of integration, and she said, I believe they're either carpetbaggers or scallywags. So I think of that, my town, as sort of like the town that time forgot. I'm not sure the decades have improved it. My brother-in-law from New Jersey visited in 1966, saw the cotton fields and the help, and quipped to my sister, his future wife, they still have slaves down here. Then she went up north to her town and his town in New Jersey and says, your town's not that good either. So Scotland County today, back then, it seemed to be fairly vibrant, although it was never rich, and it was fairly poor. But there was I remember when the war on poverty came, and there was Terry Sanford, the governor, was from Laurinburg, so he took a great interest in bringing the war on poverty to Scotland County, so there was when I can remember when I was 10, the black section of town had no paved roads. People lived in very substandard housing, and you could see the dramatic change that the war on poverty had in that community between 1965 and 1975, you know, just a dramatic change in the ability of the economic power of people. But today I have to say that Scotland County has the second highest unemployment rate in the state, 7.7%. Only Edgecombe County, where Rocky Mount is, has a higher unemployment rate. I think in addition to that, about 20% of the population, more than 20%, is retired because there's not a lot of economic activity there. And so you've basically got 30% of the population that's on some kind of assistance. There are almost daily reports of shootings and crime down there. It's been losing population for many years. So, and my sister and I, we basically got the same amount of inheritance from our parents, you know, modest inheritance. But because I invested mine up here and hers is down there, the difference in our, you know, our assets are great. So you can sort of understand why people down there really resent the people in the urban areas, you know, because they may feel left behind economically. They may feel that, you know, what it's not real justice. If you prefer the rural lifestyle, you know, you are not considered as relevant or as successful or something. Scotland County has lost family farms, textiles, small businesses, a significant amount of population. But it's not alone. 51 out of 100 counties in North Carolina are losing population. Outside urban and suburban areas, North Carolina is hurting economically. The majority of the state's 100 counties, the rural areas, are losing population and shrinking economically. The counties furthest from urban areas in the far south, the far east, the far north, and the far west corners of the state are in the worst shape, with the highest levels of poverty, as high as 29%. How many of you saw the Ted Koppel report on visiting Mount Airy? I'm putting a link in here, and so I'll post this so that you can take a look at it. It's fascinating. You know, Mayberry was what North Carolina used to think of itself, right? And if you, the Koppel went and he did kind of a case study of all the people visiting Mount Airy, Mayberry, and their views about the nostalgia was tremendous, of course. Their views of the past, but their view of the present and the sort of alienation from city life or even suburban life was quite present, and the paranoia and the sense that, you know, the 2020 election was not honest. As of last year, they were still very strongly believing that. But Chatham County, in contrast to Scotland County, they used to be quite similar. They're just 66 miles apart. Chatham County has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the state. Real estate prices have exploded. I understand why residents of rural counties feel left behind and maybe resent what is happening in the counties that are in proximity to urban areas. Mayberry is how North Carolinians used to think of themselves, but the appeal of that show probably seems irrelevant to the under 60 crowd. Mount Airy bank, for them to bank or invest on Mayberry tourism long-term might not really be smart. North Carolina is no longer dominated by natives from small towns with an agricultural heritage. It must decide what it is now and what it wants to be. It now competes with northern industrial states to be among the most populous in the nation. Our population has doubled from 5 million in 1970 to more than 10 million in 2020. Each decade, North Carolina grows by between 10% and 20%. We recently surpassed Michigan, and in the next decades will probably become larger than Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois, which are losing population. This means that only California, Texas, Florida, and New York will be larger. Think about that. So we have about the same population as Georgia. Georgia is also growing. And we, as we know, even tonight, Georgia may be undergoing a transformation politically. So is bigger better? Is becoming one of America's largest states. One of my friends suggested North Carolina was losing its soul or forsaking the values that made North Carolina special. We certainly can't push back the sea of population growth, but maybe we can have some say-so in how we grow, and if we start thinking about that. North Carolina is a state with a long history of cheap land, cheap labor, and a state government eager to foster a pro-business, anti-union climate, as the Almanac of American Politics observed. It and South Carolina vie for the least unionized states. And if you've ever driven from here to Charleston, my son lives in Charleston, so we do this frequently, and you do the back roads. The back roads from, certainly down by Scotland County, down through rural South Carolina is, it looks like a third world country. I mean, it's, the cities are, and metro areas are doing great, but those areas look like they really have been left behind. So in the urban and suburban areas, real estate is no longer cheap and wages are not keeping up with inflation. There's an acute housing shortage, which is expected to last until at least 2030. So younger generations may be priced out of real estate and even rental markets in urban and suburban areas. To find something affordable, they may have to settle for long commutes using very expensive gasoline, unless they can afford an electric car. In the 1980s, if my wife and I could save a few $1,000s, we could qualify for a mortgage. We bought a 2-story, 3-bedroom house in downtown Raleigh on a double lot, valued at $55,000 with a monthly payment of $400, on household income of slightly more than $30,000. A couple today would have to save at least $100,000 to purchase the same property, now valued at $730,000, and be prepared to make monthly payments of $2,904, according to Zillow. So North Carolina has had a strategy of pro-growth and pro-business. It has been bipartisan and enormously successful. CNBC reported that by putting partisanship aside, North Carolina ranks #1 in America's top states for business, with the nation's strongest economy. As you probably know, Apple is investing $1 billion in creating 3,000 jobs at Research Triangle Park. And there's a question about whether we're going to have light rail here. The Triangle Business Journal reported that 2023 will be a key year for the Triangle Commuter Rail Plan. You'd think that with all the job growth and traffic congestion that commuter rail would become an option, but a Durham-Chapel Hill light rail project fell through in 2019. After Apple announced its expansion in 2021, a commuter rail project connecting Durham and Raleigh is still in the planning stages. But the cost of the commuter rail has swelled by $1 billion ahead of this crucial period. So who knows whether that's going to happen. There was an article in Axios, which they're trying to localize their media coverage, about that Raleigh and Durham should actually merge. that they should have one identity, like Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that you could, if you did that, you could, if you did a lot more a government that was that had residents from both sides on it, you could get a lot more done for the region. So the legacy industries in North Carolina, of course, are tobacco, textiles, and furniture. They have declined, but they still exist. It's still a farming state, a big producer of sweet potatoes, Christmas trees, hogs, as well as agritourism. The futuristic industries are biotech, pharmaceuticals, aerospace and defense, and clean energy, which I guess would include electric vehicles, are moving up. The North Carolina Department of Commerce has profiles of major industries, which is kind of interesting. We have a rather growing immigrant population. The Hispanic population grew by 40% from 2010 to 2020. It's the largest numeric increase of any racial and ethnic group in the state. It's now 10% of the overall population, according to Carolina Demography. 8% of the state's total population is foreign-born. 1/3 of all residents working in farming, fishing, and forestry occupations are immigrants, as well as 1/5 of residents working in computer and math sciences, according to the American Immigration Council. About 3% of the population of the state is undocumented. You'd think that with full employment, 3.5%, and severe labor shortages, there would be pressure on Congress to pass a comprehensive immigration reform so that more people can work legally. But North Carolina's Republicans in Congress are mainly ranting about illegals and blaming President Biden for the immigration crisis, which Congress has failed to act on for decades. So, the fastest growing counties, rather predictably, between 2010 and 2020, bordered the cities of Raleigh, Wilmington, and Charlotte, meaning once small towns and rural areas are becoming decidedly suburban and bedroom communities. Johnson County experienced a 27.9% growth. Brunswick County down near Wilmington grew by 27.2%. Cabarrus grew by 26.8%. So the counties with cities, they have grown significantly. I won't go into the details, it's up there. But, you know, looking at 10 to 20% growth. Chatham County is being transformed before our eyes from rural to suburban, or maybe even urban. Chatham and the other counties bordering the Triangle, the Triad, and Charlotte will make the fast growth list for the next decade. Is there anybody who can remember Watts Motel? Yes? Okay. It has a kind of a notorious history, but maybe we can talk about in the the questions if you're interested. But look at this shocking photo from Car and Driver about VinFast, the electric car company, which is investing $2 billion and bringing between 7,000 and 13,000 jobs here. This was on their website. Is this the new Chatham County? That's actually the Dubai skyline, and you know I live near there, so I know what it looks like. And actually, in 50 years, Dubai went from what Scotland County was like today to this. I mean, the whole genre of rags to riches, from bare feet to bare feet riding camels to driving Mercedes. I don't know if this is our future. I hope not. Yeah, so that's actually the Dubai skyline. I'm not sure why VinFast or Car and Driver chose that image. I recognized it because I lived in Dubai for 7 years, and I hope this is not Chatham skyline in my lifetime. So, but you know, even though we're experiencing all this growth, we have a problem in that we're no longer a national leader in public education. We used to have education governors, people that, leaders who really invested in education. It used to be, North Carolina used to pride itself on being the education state with strong public schools and some of the best and most economical higher education institutions in the nation. But investments in public schools declined per capita 2010, 2020, and North Carolina is now ranked 33 below average. The quality of public education varies widely from school to school and from county to county. I think we invest pretty well in public education here, but the folks in Scotland County are complaining about their high taxes, paying for a very, to be honest, mediocre school system. It shows in the results, about 37% of North Carolinians have just a high school education or less. 30% have some college, 20% are four-year college graduates, and about 12% have a postgraduate degree. More than a third of workers have only a high school education or less. They are not likely to qualify for jobs at VinFast or Apple, or the new industries likely to expand in the future. So more people will be coming in to qualify for that unless we improve our education system. In terms of North Carolina jobs profiles, nearly 40% of jobs are currently white collar, 23.7% are blue collar, and 37% are in sales and service. Online, you can find, there's a video by a guy named Nick Johnson, and he's a YouTube star. And he did this video about 10 places in North Carolina you should never move to. And guess what? My native county was, was on there. Yeah, so Laurinburg was number 4. He said, North Carolina is a great state, but it's got some issues, and that's for sure. And the Old North state has poverty, crime, and drugs, just like anywhere in this country. Most of the state's troubled areas share things, shootings, welfare, ghetto tracts, and not a lot of opportunity for young families to get started, nor are the places you should retire. And so I reacted kind of defensively to this. And I think Scotland County and Laurinburg, they do have assets. There are things to do. I'd like to go to kayaking and canoeing on the Lumber River there. There's Scotia Village is a wonderful economical retirement community down there. There's a vineyard called Cypress Bend Vineyard near Wagram, which is a beautiful setting. It has Jazzy Fridays, live music every weekend. There's a Deercroft is a golfing community with Lake Johnson for fishing, swimming, and kayaking. It's called Scotland County. So if you're interested in Scottish heritage, they have a festival that last year had 9,000 people from around the country and overseas as well. So and they have a museum called the Scottish Heritage Museum. Anyway, so since you got to use the assets that you have, and the students wear kilts in the band, and so that Scottish heritage, they keep it going. So that video that Mr. Johnson posted is just a snapshot. Some of these places may actually be on the verge of renewal as more people move to them, if there's a visionary local leadership, if the tax base is improved, if citizens actually engage and participate in that renewal rather than sit passively by zoning out on technology and expecting others to improve their communities while they watch videos on YouTube by Mr. Johnson. So anyway, the reality check. The video that he did is a reality check to all the national hype about North Carolina as a perfect place to move to. And he's probably right that a YouTube video trumpeting small town assets will not get nearly the views as one labeled 10 places in North Carolina you should never move to, which at last count had 2.4 million views. So he's cashing in. So North Carolina's identity crisis will probably come to a head in 2024 when Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, in the tradition of Jesse Helms, seeks to divide and conquer the state, probably going to run for governor. and that will be interesting. He will likely go up against the Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein. It couldn't be a stark or contrast between the two of them about where North Carolina is headed. I've put all of these, a lot of these ideas, and I report on a number of things and do a bunch of research on. I have a Substack, which is like a blog, but you can actually pay for it. And I give out a free weekly email on current events in history, global, national, state, and local. I welcome your insights and feedback, and I might be able to publish some of your own work as well. Substack is a way for middle-range authors to make a living from their writing, given the decline of print sources such as newspapers and magazines. Ebooks can be produced, and if there's enough demand, printed books as well. So readers can pay $5 a month or $60 a year and access hundreds of articles and participate in discussions. So here are some articles that are related to this, which I can't really go into tonight, but how the Solid South and especially North Carolina switched from reliably Democrat to reliably Republican. This is a personal story about coming of age on racial matters in North Carolina and the South, and being a Southerner, and how do you grapple with your heritage, and how the Civil War lives on in contemporary American life. I think we're seeing that through the phenomenon of Trump, and we don't know where it's headed, but I think the recent election results suggest that more positive than some of us had feared. Okay, here's my contact information, jimbuie2@gmail.com, my Substack address, and I have a URL called byaslenderthread.com. So, okay. So, we can take questions. Anybody has any questions? Yes. Yeah, okay.
Hi, anybody have a question? Please put up your hand and I'll come around and give you a chance to ask a question.
We'll see if I've got it. In relation to what you were saying about VinFast and other of those industries coming, are community colleges doing anything in trying to get local kids ready for those jobs?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. I think I think Chatham County is, they've got a program to train high school kids to plan for jobs at VinFast. I know Chatham does, and I'm not, but that would be good for the other community colleges as well, and I think they're working on it. So, yeah.
Was there a question? There was a question back here.
Yeah.
There you go.
You mentioned, if I understood correctly, that the war on poverty back in the 60s, I guess it was, had a profoundly positive impact over the period of a decade.
Yeah.
Can you speak in any more detail about what particular aspects of that very broad program had the most impact or most important?
Well, I think it was also desegregation. In Scotland County, what happened was the school system consolidated, and so that I went to the first 8 years. I went to an elementary school, middle school that was, it was vast majority white. We had a few Native Americans and Columbia Indians and a few Black kids, but that was it. And then consolidated, and we had into a really integrated school, high school, Scotland High School, that was 48% Black, 48% white, and 4% about 4% Native American. There was a lot of racial tension, but that happened for a couple of years, and then people got over it, and so they really began, I think, to work together and live together. And I think that created some positive synergy. I think that, well, I just remember visibly seeing the African-American parts of town going from no paved roads and, you know, very substandard housing to, it seemed like it happened overnight where their streets were paved and their housing really improved. And, you know, instead of these ramshackle wood houses, they got these new brick houses. I guess they were actually getting decent paying jobs. So that did have an impact for, I would say, at least a decade or more. And probably longer than that. And I think people still depend on those services. But the larger economic issue of isolated rural counties is still there. And yeah.
I'll bring this over to you.
I grew up in Richmond County, and Scotland County had a reputation in the 1950s of being a county that attracted industry.
Yes.
Why did they lose that ability to keep industry?
Well, in about 1960, they got St. Andrews College. And then they got, I remember in 1964, I believe it was Springs Textile Mill opened, and they had all these jobs, and all the streets in my little town had traffic backed up all the way up into the sandhills. And that was amazing. You know, and people applying for jobs there, and that was good income. But the textiles, you know, they went to China, and I guess they went to China or India or whatever. And so there's a lot of resentment about that too. And then farming, family farms really basically changed to become, you know, agribusiness. So it's corporate farming now. So, and we used to joke when I was learning economics that Scotland County was feudal. It was feudalism. There were a few families that were sort of the lords and barons, and everybody else, you know, had to work for them one way or another. And I think it was that way to some extent. And then, we criticized it, and I remember sort of wanting to have labor unions and stuff like that. So the textile says, well, you know, we won't be around if you have all this labor activists, and they're not around anymore. So I don't know.
I've got several questions from Zoom, but I'll ask one first and we'll put them in the rotation.
Yeah.
First question, can you comment on the apparent disconnect between the GOP's avowed pro-business philosophy and its hostility to its university system, a key, if not the key driver of states' growth?
Yeah, I think that sort of the idea of low tax, the only platform they have is cut taxes, and basically it's sort of an oligarchy and a trickle down philosophy that I do not think as North Carolina grows, if we don't really invest in education, we will not have a good future. You know, I think that's going to be really important. And I also think that I have some hope that maybe in the next 2 years that there might be a compromise on immigration, where you could get people legal so they can work in these in the manufacturing economy that seems to be growing a lot, you know, and because there's still a job shortage. I mean, they can't fill jobs. So, yeah.
Another one.
I've got more, so if nobody else has it.
Oh, here's one right here.
Yeah, hi. Can you explain why the rural counties vote for Republicans? The Republican Party has done nothing for the working man in my
Well, I'll
lifetime.
tell you, I've been wondering about that a lot. In 2008, which I thought North Carolina had really transformed itself when Obama took North Carolina in 2008. Remember that, by 14,000 votes. That was incredible. Well, Bill Clinton came to St. Andrews College in Laurinburg and had this huge crowd there. Scotland County has gone from almost always voting Democratic. My father called himself a yeller dog Democrat, meaning he would vote for a yeller dog if it was on the Democratic ticket before he'd ever vote for Republican, because his grandmother and his great grandmother told him, don't ever vote for a Republican. But I think that, I was thinking about when Clinton came in 2008, and he talked about stimulating the economy locally, and it didn't happen for that area. It really didn't happen. And they just have given up on Democrats because they feel like a lot of promises were made and the rural areas have not thrived. And I think it's a problem bigger than any politician. But I think one of the things the Democratic Party needs to do is start listening to rural people and being advocates for rural America if we're going to have a future. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Okay, I believe the second question that's in the chat was answered about the GOP, why it changed from Democrat to GOP. I think that last question covered that. Next question, do you know how your former school district is teaching about the Civil War these days? Is it teaching about the Civil War? If so, how? I guess Scotland County.
It's a very interesting question. I'm going to find out about that. I've got some friends down there that can let me know how it's teaching about it, whether it's still the war of northern aggression or not. Yeah, that's right. I think you learned that too, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I want to come back to the question of the switch from Dems to Republicans to, and I struggle with this because I spent 20 some years in Kansas, which was the progressive state of the Midwest at the time we were there, was excited to come to North Carolina in 2000 when it was still the progressive Southern state. And it seems to me it was the Tea Party and it was Newt Gingrich, all of those things when things switched. And I'm trying to figure out, is it that the people switched? Because you talk about the old yellow dog Democrats, and some of that was, you remember Lincoln was Republican.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and he started, I think, the Republican Party. And so Democrats at one time were not the party that was pro-integration. We were the other side.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about, well, they were the Dems, and which doesn't mean, I don't know what the party labels really mean. We were the party of unions when I was growing, the 40-hour work and the shirtless fire. All of those were the cases that we fought for as Democrats.
But not North Carolina.
In North Carolina, we don't have unions here. Party identity has really anything to do with any of these real issues, or whether we just need to scrap our current party system.
I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
Jim, there've been several comments on education.
Yeah.
I'm a native, as you know, your neighbor,
Yeah.
and I'm a retired school principal, retired about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out as a teacher, taught 7th grade language arts and social studies for 10 or 11 years. I was a principal in middle school for about 19 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I saw North Carolina make great progress.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a lot of money training teachers,
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of money on materials, and computers.
Mm-hmm.
I was real proud of it. But there's a hidden tax now in North Carolina that is taxing many middle-class people in nice, in well-kept neighborhoods and others. It is the fact that we have let our education system go down.
Mhm.
Therefore, they are choosing to send their children to private schools,
Right, yep.
and they're paying 10 and 12, $15,000 a year. One person in Greensboro at a prominent private school over there told me the tuition was $20,000
Mhm.
for 1 year.
Mhm.
So this is money that well-educated people are making
Yeah.
that is going to a place which is fine to have varied educational opportunities. But my point is, had we continued to improve our education system, some of that money could be pumped back into education, pumped back into the state, and pumped back into families.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
And another issue related to that is resegregation, I think. In that if you have wealthy white people going, sending their kids to private schools, then what's going to happen? What's happening to the public schools? So, yeah.
I just want to add a postscript to that because it's not just the wealthy people who are getting the money. The party, I think, mostly been pushing to spend our tax dollars to send kids to essentially private schools. Very much segregated and teaching the things we aren't necessarily wanting them to be teaching, or that don't promote the Constitution of the United States. That's for sure.
I have a question that I've just thought about that I'll ask you, and that is that, so what does all this have to do with the Chatham Democratic Party? I think the one thing Chatham is a Democratic county now, what, 54%, solidly Democratic county. We don't know that that's going to continue. When all of this new people come in and there are a lot of manufacturing jobs, if Democrats don't listen to them and really represent their point of view, it will not be true anymore, I don't think.
One interesting correlation I noticed is that you said education in North Carolina in the school system had declined from 2010 onward. I'll also highlight that that's when the Republicans took over the state legislature
Right,
and
right.
began cutting funds to state education.
Mhm.
That's it's no real coincidence. It's perhaps by intent. Not sure what the real intent was, other than to perhaps fertilize the soil for private schools and charter schools.
Mhm. Yep.
Where do we stand now with the Leandro decision? As I remember, the state Supreme Court said that the legislature had to fund the Leandro
Right.
decision, and that's mainly going to help the poor rural schools. And yet, isn't it? Am I correct by saying that the Republicans have said that they're not going to follow the law and they're not going to give them the money that is due, like, for 40 years?
Not only that, but I think it's going to go back to the state Supreme Court, and we have a change in the makeup of the state Supreme Court. So there's now a Republican majority. So I don't know. Yeah. So there's a lot of good news here, and that is that it doesn't sound good, but there is. I mean, the fact that the state's economy is really growing, and even Scotland County, I think the synergy from all this economic development in Chatham is spilling down. They just got an announcement of a 500 job plant in Scotland County, and that's a lot of jobs for that county, to create meals for servicemen in Fort Bragg. So people from Scotland County they'll have cheap, relatively cheap real estate. some of them can drive up to VinFast to work maybe. And so I guess those kind of counties are going to become like satellites of the more urban areas. But unless there's, I had a guy I grew up with who lived in Maryland for many years, came back to his family property and built a vineyard. And it has been an enormous success. I mean, it's one of the best vineyards in North Carolina, I think, but I'm biased. But anyway, so I mean, you ought to go down to Cypress Bend Vineyard. He's trying to now, because he's getting up there in age, he's trying to sell it. So anybody here wants to buy a vineyard.
I'll say a couple things.
Yeah, okay.
He's my roommate,
Oh,
so.
Yeah,
With Wolf Speed coming into Siler City,
yes.
that's going to be a great boon for Siler City, which was featured in a PBS special in about 2002 about being a Latino growth area, as you may well know. And its main affiliation, its university affiliation is with North Carolina A&T. So that's going to be their main recruiting university. And North Carolina A&T, I think, has had a technological, basis and a teacher, education basis. I think that's going to transform North Carolina A&T into an even higher profile. When I used to drive down from Maryland for 39 years, I just noticed North Carolina A&T alumni and they were coming down from everywhere. So I think that's a real positive thing. And coming from a county which is no longer growing, but is stagnant.
You're talking about Montgomery County, Maryland.
Yes.
Yeah.
Coming to an area that is growing has its challenges, but I believe it's a lot better to be growing than not growing.
Steve and I have talked about this, that this area is probably where DC was back in the DC area was back in the 60s, early 60s. So I don't know if that means that we're going to be as congested as in 50 years or 60 years, or if we're going to be as congested as DC is. I hope not. I hope I'm not around. But anyway, that's something to think about. We ought to have some say-so in all this growth. I mean, it shouldn't just happen. Okay.
So wasn't this interesting? This is a whole nother side of North Carolina that we talk a lot about politics, which is really important, but all of the things that surround the politics and that derive from the politics, those of us who aren't from here, which is most of us, didn't know this, but we've had little tastes of it, I think. I did want to say that we just elected 3 very progressive county commissioners for Chatham County, and they're going to have a big impact on some of the planning. And I know that's very much on the forefront of their minds. So that leads us back to politics. That wouldn't have happened without all the people going out to vote for them instead of for their Republican counterparts. I was thinking that if you want to give us your slides, we could post them on our website, and there will also be a Zoom
There's also a
recording.
link to some the Ted Koppel video on Mayberry, and then that's 10 places not to live in, if you want to watch it.
Right. Right. So those links will be live once you get the slides on the website. You could just click on them. Well, thank you very much. This was very interesting. And you have on your seat who's speaking to us back to politics in January. Rob Schofield knows everything there is about North Carolina politics, and he's willing to answer any question. He just lays it out, good guys and bad guys.